we really are on the fast track for climate action. And part of that is the powerhouse local governments that we have here who are really driving a lot of the change that we're seeing at a provincial government policy level. And I just like to emphasize that they were driving it through different government leaders. So at the moment we have a very green provincial government, but they've also been driving it when there was less green provincial leadership. So it's been something that's been constant and growing over the last 10 years, and I think gives us a lot of confidence that we're on the fast track to really making some big moves here. And the one thing I'd point out, I know the municipalities who are on the phone here are largely large municipalities. One of the things we've seen here in BC is it's not just Vancouver who's moving, it's also the Richmonds, the Burnabys, the Surreys, the Coquitlams, in the Kootenays, even small communities. And I think that's because of the networks that we've established here. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the behind the scenes, like how we made this program happen. Introduce who I am, what my role has been, what potential partners are out there to be able to fund positions for you within your local governments. Talk a little bit about the different models for co-funding staff positions, and then some tips that I've seen around things you might consider before engaging staff, accepting funding to engage staff within your organizations. So I think the next slide is a picture of me, but you got me up ahead, so I won't click to that. But I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. So you've got my full bio, I think, in the meeting invitation. I think some of the key things is that I've worked for local government. I worked for the City of Burnaby for 5 years as their environmental planner. So I really have understood both the excitement of working within local government and all the tools that you have to be able to drive climate action. But also some of the frustrations that you might have within your organization, both of limitation on staff capacity or working with different departments or getting the political will to drive things through. So based on that, I joined BC Hydro about 11 years ago and have been working on developing and evolving, and we're always evolving our community energy manager program and the peer networks that we have associated with that. And just one last thing on my intro is that one of my professional priorities for the last year or so has been to take the lessons that we've had here in BC around these organizational changes, these funding models, and share those more broadly nationally and internationally. I think there's something really magical about what we've achieved here in BC by funding positions within local government and increasingly other organizations as well, to be able to move the dial and really welcome the opportunity to talk to you today and after this webinar as well if you have more questions around this. So let's see if I can move this slide now. I'm clicking here, Alison. Oh, here we go. Let's get past that one. You don't need two of me. There we go. All right. So I work for BC Hydro now. Just had a question about how many of you on this webinar work with your utilities? Like, does anybody else have a sort of energy efficiency program or a collaboration with your local utilities?
Hi, this is Shannon in Halifax.
Hey, Shannon.
Hi. We have an interesting structure of having that Nova Scotia Power, our sole kind of power provider, has been to have to buy all.
You're cutting in and out a bit, Shannon.
Oh, sorry, and I'm not really sure about that. Let me just try putting my volume up.
Yeah, your sound's not working, Shannon. We can hear that you're talking, but we can't make out what you're saying.
Okay, I'll just type it.
You can always type it into the chat box if you want, Shannon, and while we'll go to Alberta and ask Mark and Jamie what their relationships are with utilities there.
And I'm talking particularly about programs around climate action or energy efficiency, as opposed to simply the local utility providing you with power.
That's Mark here, and I would say, yeah, we tend to have, on a project by project basis, we tend to have some interactions and potential projects and that type of thing with our various utilities that we have in Alberta. For example, vehicle charging stations and that type of thing, or electric vehicle charging stations and that type of thing. But I would also say it's at times it's sort of the love-hate relationship at times. Some of those seem to be really good, and then all of a sudden something comes at us and we're saying, hey, what's going on here? But anyways, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks.
I think it's Jamie here. I think I would pretty much echo the same thing.
Shannon says in Nova Scotia, we have an efficiency utility that sells energy efficiency to Nova Scotia Power and are legislated to do so, and that they work closely with Efficiency Nova Scotia. So we don't have Lindsay. She's in Mexico right now on the line from Winnipeg, but I know that she has some work that she does with Manitoba Hydro as well, but they don't have this sort of program with them. And Natasha in Montreal, I don't believe has a similar relationship with Quebec Hydro, although they tend to work together a little bit on a more friendly basis as well, I believe.
Great. Well, that's helpful. I think there was somebody from Saskatoon as well. Any insights on what's happening there?
Hi, sorry, this is Nasha. Yeah, we do have, I guess, smaller initiatives underway. We don't have any hydro in this city. We are exploring that just on a small scale, but limited opportunity on that front. Cool,
that's great. Thanks guys for the context. So we're BC Hydro. We are the electrical utility for the whole of the province. So about 70% of our electricity comes from these large hydro dams that you see in the top left-hand corner. We also have wind. We're largely renewable, about 97% renewable electricity here in BC, micro hydro, etc. And then we provide electricity into the communities to be able to fuel all the things that you need to be doing. We have a mandate from the government. We have demand-side management programs, like I think some of your utilities will as well. And we have a mandate that 60% of all, or 66% of all new demand comes through conservation. So we have a mandate to invest in conservation programs and cost-efficient conservation as well. And the most cost-efficient way that we can do this is through policy and codes work. And so our group is tasked with working with local governments in order to empower them to use the regulatory tools that you have at your disposal to be able to generate electricity savings so that we don't have to build more infrastructure. So it's very cost effective for us. So that's a little bit of background about why we as BC Hydro want to work with local governments. Our program is a bit different from some of the other demand side management programs, which have been focused on more like fridge buybacks or incentives for industrial customers or commercial customers. Ours is more at a relational level with local government, trying to encourage you guys to be using the tools that you have at your disposal. I'm trying to click forward here. Oh, there we go. So here's a picture you probably recognize. This is Pete Russell. You recognize that? What do you think, Pete?
Sorry, I hear my name periodically. I was just dealing with another matter.
Robyn was just saying this is you hugging the lion on the screen.
So, my experience working within local governments is that everyone wants to be friends with local government. Everyone wants to be able, for you to be able to use the tools at your disposal to be able to help them get their projects through. So whether that's a developer project or utilities, etc. And so sometimes I don't know how comfortable that relationship is for you with those partner organizations, but I think we've hit a really sweet spot with us as BC Hydro with our energy conservation mandate and local governments, your climate action mandate. So why there are obviously a lot of funders who are looking to work with you now around climate action, and why is it that they're targeting you as partners? Well, firstly, I think local governments have proved yourselves out to be nimble, action-oriented champions around climate change. As we see other levels of government wax and wane around climate action, you guys have been real leaders in the change that we need to see happen. One of the reasons why you actually are much more active, I think, than some levels of government is that you're experiencing real climate change impacts on a daily basis. When your engineers are designing dikes and floodplain levels, etc., you're thinking about the 1 in 100-year event. So climate change is very real if you're using a science-based approach to looking at how you actually put those measurements in place. Again, you're on the front line of forest fires, etc. So maybe that's why local governments have been more active in this space than other forms of government. The reason that we as Hydro were really drawn to work with local government is that we believe that you have completely unique powers of influence, very different from ours. And how do we marry those two powers together? So we're constantly, through our community energy management network, trying to understand what those legal powers and really push the boundaries on how we use those powers to make the changes that we need to see to get more efficient buildings, and more low carbon transportation. So the powers you have are obviously in community design, in building permits, in your regulatory side on what you're requiring in building permits, and some of that incentive, the incentives that you can bring to bear, and those have certainly grown and much larger over the 11 years we've had our program in place, and also the relationships. Your staff have a unique interactions with people that we're looking to influence. So as builders are coming in, they're at the early stages of their building design, your frontline staff are having conversations with them. What a great opportunity to educate them and to provide feedback on more progressive building structure, whether that's a requirement or simply through education. So I think we've really expanded the toolbox of tools that local governments have, but I don't think we've finished at all yet. I think there's still more tools out there that you can be using to influence the way that we design and build low carbon communities. But the challenge that I found when I was working within local governments is that I had limited resources, and it's a bit of an embarrassment when I think back of all the projects that I did and the missed opportunities I had. People came in and asked, "Hey, Robyn, should we be doing this?" And I just didn't know. I didn't have the bandwidth, and I didn't have the expertise to always make the best decisions. So local government's fun. You get plenty of opportunities to influence things, but you don't always have the capacity to be able to make those best decisions. So that's what we're talking about here, about adding resources to empower you to be more influential in the decisions you're making. So often when people come in and say, "Hey, we want to work with local governments," there's these big grant programs that are out there. And you come in, you get a consultant, do a project for you, and then they leave. And that might be great that they've delivered a great project for you, but that knowledge walks out the door when the consultant walks out the door as well. We think a better model is, rather than having the consultants leave, but actually to grow your team. So have somebody who's working full-time within your department, who's working on these projects, who can chat with people at the water cooler, and influence the way that the city is set up and the decisions that you're making, the many decisions that you're making that impact the carbon footprint of your community. And this is reflected in the way that we've had our funding offer. So when we first started up, we had 3 buckets of funding that we offered: planning, so co-funding community energy emissions plans, people, like funding the community energy managers, people like Alison, and then projects. We had some project-based funding. So now, 11 years on, what does our funding split look like? We've really reduced the amount of money that we put into planning. I'm actually a planner by training, and yeah, I kind of a bit of an anti-planner. I'm not keen on these, multi-year planning processes when we need to actually have action. So yes, we need plans. We need to be strategic in how we use resources, but let's get in and getting projects getting built at the same time as we're doing that planning, or in line with the plans that are coming out. But the area that's really grown for us is the number of people offers that we have. So we have community energy managers. They've been the heart and soul of our partnership. We also have positions within building departments. We have education programs for elected officials. We have scholars programs, co-ops, interns coming in. So looking at all the different ways that we can support your departments in order to give you the horsepower that you need to be able to drive climate action. I'm going to just talk about a few of the successes about why I think that approach works. Has everybody heard the Energy Step Code? Is it new to some people?
I think it's possible for Nasha and Gina, who are newer to our membership, that they're not familiar with it. But we have at 2 different annual meetings talked about the Energy Step Code a little bit.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll be very quick about it then. So the Energy Step Code is a series of codes that go from, here's the base building code, that's down at step 1 in BC, and we've envisaged where the base building code needs to go in 2032, and that's to ultra efficient net zero ready buildings. And this Energy Step Code gives steps between now, it was 2017 and 2032, of progressive steps about how we could crank up the building code to get more efficient buildings. So it's understanding what that market transformation path should be. And it's been incredibly successful. So it was just released at the end of 2017. So local governments have had a year to be able to reference the lower steps, any of these lower steps, in their base building bylaw. So they can choose to require higher standards than the base building code. So step 3 is 20% higher, just to reference that. And within a year, we had 14 local governments have adopted the Energy Step Code, which makes up about over half of all building permits this year. And we have another 16 who are consulting on it, which would take us up to about 70% of all building permits getting built above code. And that also the local government community energy managers have been incredibly influential about working with other professional organizations, about getting people trained up, getting people excited, providing incentives and case studies and tours around how we can build right away. We can build right now to that upper level and say, yeah, these are some pilot projects, but we're going to require down here. But we're going to get pilot projects put in place so that we can show the market where to go and learn from those so that we're ready for when that base building code changes. And there's been so much confidence that has come out of the step code process that just before Christmas, the province announced that they've set dates for the base building code to go to step 3 in 2022, and then let's go to step 4 in 2027, and then it will be step 5 in 2032. So we now have a very clear roadmap provincially around where the building code is going to go to be able to support the climate goals that we have. Another example of success that we had last year is around home energy labeling. And so some of the local governments, the community energy managers got together and brainstormed what would it take to require all new homes to have a home energy label tied to it. Put a little bulletin together. 6 local governments have already adopted those requirements, which mean that next year or this year, 43% of all building permits will have a label tied to it. And again, we have many other local governments who are looking to follow suit. And I think that again gives the province confidence that this is moving, and so yeah, we can make this a provincial requirement. Another example, final example, is around electric vehicle charging. So Pete's staff at City of Richmond looked at what should the requirements be for electric vehicle charging in new construction. They conducted a really great comprehensive costing study around it and came up with requirements for all new build to have EV charging. And then that confidence in building that, put together a best practices guide. That best practices guide was finished in November, but already 8 local governments have already taken up the best practices that Richmond put in place, which means that about 47% of all new building permits will have EV charging this year in BC. So a real model of how community energy managers work on projects, work it all out, and one might be working on one, another might be working on a different topic, share those best practices, and we're seeing really strong movement. And then the province going, okay, I guess this is reasonable. We could start to adopt this on a provincial level. So getting back into what does staff funding looks like. Here are some of the organisations that have funded staff within BC municipalities. So ourselves, we have corporate energy managers who help you reduce your electricity footprint at your corporate buildings like rec centres, pump stations, etc. Our sister utility Fortis, it's a natural gas utility. They also have programs, energy specialists and community energy specialists. FCM are supporting staff. Unfortunately, they're just looking for smaller communities, which I think is a bit of a loss. I think large communities need support just as much, and plus the impact that you get in a large community is way more than in some of the very small municipalities. I think both need support, but in different ways. NGOs and philanthropic organizations have looked at funding people, and then developers. Sometimes developers fund staff within local governments for short-term projects. So there's three key ways that I think of the staff funding programs. The first one is that short-term project support. So it might be a developer who's coming in and putting a transportation engineer in place as part of a subdivision. We also offer short-term positions. For example, we have scholars program that we fully fund. So UBC master's degree scholars come and you define your research project that you want, and we place those, we fund those people and put them in your organizations. So the reason for this is to give you more horsepower on a specific project. It's not looking at organizational change, it's just getting your work done. And also to support young professionals coming into the industry. The second type of model I've seen, I'd call short-term capacity building. That's something like FCM is trying to do at the moment. So that's 1 or 2 year positions within your organization. Great to have them there for a longer period of time. We started with 1 year programs. We've moved to 2, and it's great to see FCM moving to 2 year programs. I think that's the amount of time you need for that person to get trained up and adjusted, and also to be able to attract people to come into your organization. If it's a 2 year position, much more persuasive than a 1 year position. And so it's great to have somebody like a real person. And here's Megan Lohman, who we've co-funded in the Kootenays for about 6 or 7 years now. Great to have Megan being brought into your organization, or a real live person who can sit around the water cooler and help to change some of the thinking within your organization. I think the real magic is when you add a peer network in. So here's Megan back just before Christmas at a workshop that we had with other community energy managers. Here's some of the community energy managers we fund there's somebody from Victoria, Richmond, Saanich, Port Moody. And so she's now locked into other people doing identical work within other municipalities. And so one can say, here's Maggie down here, for example. She's the woman who put together the bulletin on how you do home energy labeling. Now, unfortunately, her council wasn't ready to move, so she couldn't implement it straight away, but she put it together as a bulletin, and wouldn't you know it, others were able to take that forward. So we've seen home energy labeling requirements, like here's Nick from Richmond, who was able to put it in at Richmond, or Vancouver had it already. So they're able to work as a network to move much more rapidly than if you've just got one person within an organization. Now, I think the real magic is, yes, having networks, yes, having positions, but let's look at long-term capacity building. So here's that same photograph of that group. There's Megan, and look, there she is. This is a photograph from 5 years ago. I know it was 5 years ago because I was pregnant at the time. I'm looking a bit chunky in the front there. And look at the back there. Yep, your best friend there, Alison Ashcroft.
Thank you.
So the secret of having Megan has got all this knowledge, all these relationships with those groups as well. Really, really powerful in bringing expertise and keeping expertise. The other thing is organizationally, like Alison left, but then we've had Devon. So we're able to continue that knowledge as people go, new people come in, and they're able to learn from Megan and Chris and others and Nick and others in that network. So again, real power of having that long-term capacity.
I would just add also that because it's such a magnetic network, it's so much fun. I just went to a recent meeting that of the community energy managers, and it was just so great to be back in the crowd. But as a result, the alumni don't go very far either.
Yeah, that's true. People who graduate often stay within the field as consultants, helping serve our projects, senior leadership within local government. So I really see it as a step, a ladder step to influencing the overall industry here in BC around doing much more sustainable and responsible work around community development. So I'm just going to wrap up with some tips, I thought, as somebody who's been both within local government and somebody who's been a funder around what you might think about if you haven't received funding for staff before within your organizations. Actually, Alison, have most people received funding for staff, or is this going to be new for some people?
Well, I mean, we can ask. I mean, I think obviously in British Columbia, everyone's gone through your program at some point. Is anybody on the phone have been eligible for the staff support grants and have a staff support? I think the only cities in CUSP's network that are eligible are Victoria, Saanich, and North Vancouver, and they're not on the phone today.
Okay.
In Saskatchewan, we have an FCM grant for 3 projects right now that all have staff eligible expenses, I guess.
Have you hired them already, Nasha?
Yeah, we're in the middle of them right now, so they're all going to be coming due this year. So it has translated into 1 permanent position. Well, 1 permanent position and 1 permanent that isn't actually funded. But we're hoping that it would translate, once those projects are finished, that it would translate into more.
Great, thank you. Okay,
it's Mark here from Edmonton.
Oh, sure, Mark. Great to hear.
Just a note, and maybe this is just maybe going back to the fact that there hasn't been a whole bunch of this stuff over time. I'm thinking the last time that we actually took advantage of something, you know, I guess some of the project funding would come through and support some of our staff time. I guess there's a bit of training and budget and that type of thing. But I'm going back to the 1-ton challenge, which I can't even remember what year that was. But going back to that, there was resources to actually hire staff in that program. So that's just going a long time, and I don't think the federal side there's been anything since that. So, anyways.
Was the 1-time challenge, was that an FCM thing?
No, that was the federal government. The 1-ton challenge. Rick Mercer.
Oh, the
anybody
1-ton.
remember that? The 1-ton. Sorry, yeah.
Yep.
Challenge. So that was got to be, I don't know how many years ago. Quite a few, right? So anybody has a better memory than mine on timelines, but.
Great. So yes, so some of you may have experience accepting funding, staff resources. Others, this might be new to you. But so here's some tips that I thought that you might want to think about as you accept staffing. I think the first thing is to really understand your funders' goals and understand who we are as different organizations. I think sometimes those goals can be really compatible, so there's really great overlap here. Other times, there are different motivations for organizations wanting to work with you. And I think there can be common ground, but I think you would need to be clear around what that organization is trying to get out of it and what you're committing to by having those staff positions. So doing a bit of your homework and understanding who your point of contact is within that organization is really helpful for building trust and building a work plan that's going to work for both organizations. Second, linked in with that is understanding the program obligations. So we've worked very, very hard to design programs that are super easy to access and are very reasonable for reporting. We need accountability of how our money is being spent. Peter can comment on hopefully it's easy to access, and we've been very flexible, but I'll leave Peter to comment on that. But the real key here is to understand what your obligations are, what are the deliverables that you need to be able to provide the funder, and you don't want this position to be spending half of their time doing paperwork back to the funder. Or maybe it's worth it for you, but you want to be, I would say, work with your funder to make reasonable deliverables and reasonable reporting requirements. I was just talking to a community recently who's been having a real challenge with a new funder who's been providing resources in their organization, and just the amount of time and paperwork they've had to do has been a real distraction, and they're not sure that they're going to be renewing after the next couple of years because of that paperwork. So I think providing that feedback back to the funder is going to be really important. The third thing is work with senior leadership in setting up the work plan. So we used to start off in developing work plans. Like I'd come and I'd talk to Alison and Alison's boss, and I'd say, hey, what sort of things do you want to do this year? And they'd say, oh yeah, we want to do this, that, and t'other. And so we kind of work it into a work plan. But I started to realize that I had quite a lot of expertise to offer by having these negotiations, and I had a clear sense of what everybody else was doing around the network, and so how could we communicate that back to a municipality so we weren't just starting with a blank sheet? And also, how could we work with senior leadership within the organization? Like Alison, as you know, is phenomenal, but sometimes she struggled, if I may say, by having senior leadership not bought into her work plan. Is that fair, Alison?
Yeah, I was waiting for an opening to say that, I actually I loved these work plans, and I actually spent a lot of time on them and made our contracts as tight as possible, because there was so much shift in my senior leadership, and their appetite for my work was also waning frequently. I locked in as many of the actions as I possibly could into this contractual document and work plan, so that I would have some stability with the work I was doing, despite what might be happening above me.
Cool. So one of the changes we made about 4 or 5 years ago was to create a requirement that to fund a position, we had to have a workshop with senior leadership. So I, as Hydro's rep, came in, and Pete or whoever the boss is of the community manager pulls in senior leadership from all different departments. So that would be from like buildings, from planning, from engineering. Finance has been a great body to have, and we do a 2 or 3 hour workshop with those senior leaderships, and then they define the workshop. The work plan that's going to be doing. So we've created a tool to run through this workshop, because you have to make it fun if you're going to require 2 to 3 hours of senior senior leadership time. Actually, I should say it's actually we do a full day workshop if you've never done anything around community energy managers, and then we were able to reduce that down to about a 3 hour workshop if we've had experience with you. And so this graphic that we have in front of you this is how we used to measure success. We used to look at what actions have you taken as a municipality, but through our work with different municipalities, we understood that in order for you to be able to take action, you need to have these organizational pieces in place, and not always all of them, but some of them. So, for example, we looked at why is it that you understand why Vancouver is moving so fast, because they've got the mayor knocking on Doug's door saying, "Hey, Doug, where's your next project?" But we were really impressed that communities like Surrey, which didn't have that political demand, were still able to really drive forward with some very innovative, very powerful action. And why was that? And we determined it's because they had embedded commitment within their organization. So that was like strategic plans in place, financial plans in place, performance management, and they'd also were able to mobilize people internally. So we look at how have you got your internal networks in place, where is your political leadership, and what's your external networks. So we now run ahead of these contracts, these workshops with the community. And here's a little snapshot of the tool. It's an interactive workshop where the group together, senior leadership, answers a bunch of questions like, do you have funding in place? Is it a small amount? Is it a large amount? And they sort of click these buttons, and then they go through and answer these questions. And then at the end of the workshop, or actually halfway through, we're able to show benchmark results. So like, this is your community. Hey, it's got great strategic commitment, but maybe you need to improve around performance management. You know, financial commitments in place, but maybe it's not a council priority, which may be fine, but we're just documenting where you guys are at. So it helps them to understand where they're at, and these larger blobs are where other municipalities are. So the more, the bigger the blobs, the more the municipalities who are in that space. So you can work out whether you're a leader or whether there's something that you could do to learn from others who are further ahead. So based on that sort of benchmarking of where you're at, then that senior leadership uses yellow stickers and nominates specific things that they think the work plan should be included in the work plan, which is super powerful because now you've got a work plan that's been nominated by the senior leadership team. We can talk more about that tool, but I think it's been really helpful for us to get really great quality work plans and also have a chance to have face time and airtime with senior leadership. Just wrapping up here. So the fourth suggestion is around you being the people that recruit. If you're managing the person, you don't want somebody coming in from another organization. You want to be able to determine who's going to be a great fit within your organization. And finally, like, set up a good reporting structure. We often had dotted line reporting, so the person might be funded within building department, for example, like City of Surrey, and co-fund somebody in the building department. So they're able to influence that culture, but they have a dotted line reporting structure in through her, so she can provide some leadership around it. So I'm just going to wrap up with a slide saying that, you know, I think the thesis of my sort of professional beliefs is now that, you know, we need to change significant things around climate action, but often we get mired in technical standards and technical things. I think the change will happen for the people. Here are two of our guys at a workshop. They were even starting to dress together, which is why I took this photograph. They were wearing the same shirt. I think having people in place is what changes relationships, which empower change, and working with different organizations. So thank you for your time, and welcome any questions or comments.